So, I want you to picture the city of Berlin, but specifically in the winter of 1947.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is a bleak starting point.
Right. Historians actually refer to this specific period in Germany as the wolf time.
The wolf time. That just sounds terrifying.
It really does. And it was. I mean, you have this entire continent that has just been completely, utterly physically shattered by, the most destructive war in human history.
The infrastructure is just pulverized, literal rubble everywhere.
Exactly. The basic institutions of civilization like banks, courts, police forces, they've basically just evaporated overnight.
Just gone.
Yeah. And people are like burning their own furniture just to keep from freezing to death, trading family heirlooms for a single potato.
It's a level of visceral political collapse that is, honestly, almost impossible for us to even comprehend today.
Right, because we're sitting here in our comfortable climate-controlled rooms. We look back at that physical devastation and we think, well, thank goodness that era of history is over.
Yeah, we think we're past that.
But, what if the collapse of a civilization doesn't always look like bombed-out
Well,
buildings? Like, what if the next great collapse is entirely invisible?
that is, it's a haunting question, especially when you consider that the architectural blueprints for our modern world, right?
Mm.
Like the global financial systems, the military alliances.
It's trade agreements, all of it.
Exactly. All of that was drawn up in the immediate aftermath of that exact 1947 rubble you're talking about.
Yeah.
The institutions built to pull us out of the wolf time are literally the very same structures holding up the sky today.
And if you've been reading the news lately, or honestly, even if you just feel that low-level hum of geopolitical anxiety when you scroll through your feed, you've probably noticed that those foundational structures are rattling.
They're definitely
The
rattling.
normal rules of the world just seem to be evaporating. So today, we are going to look directly at those fault lines.
And we have a massive, dense, and frankly, highly provocative stack of source material to unpack today.
Yes, we do. We are doing a deep dive into a high-level panel discussion from a Dutch platform called De Nieuws World.
Which translates to the New World.
Right. And the title of this session alone really sets the tone. It's called The End of the West, with a question mark.
Yeah, they certainly did not invite these people just to pat each other on the back.
No, absolutely not.
It's a ruthless deconstruction of modern geopolitics. You have four incredibly distinct heavyweight perspectives colliding on this panel.
So let's break down who we're actually listening to here.
Right, so first there's Court de Boeuf. He's a Middle East expert and a former top-tier EU political insider.
Like, he's actually been in the rooms where these massive decisions are made.
Exactly. And then you have Willem Middelkoop, who is a prominent economist and author. He looked at the world through the cold, hard math of macro cycles.
Which is fascinating. And adding to that, we have Dieter de Rogd, a historian who basically specializes in ripping apart the standard, comfortable geopolitical narratives we're usually fed.
He takes no prisoners.
Not at all. And finally, Ad Verbrugge, a philosopher who kind of zooms out to look at the existential and cultural rot underneath all of this.
It is a heavy stack of notes.
Yeah.
And honestly, some of the theories these four map out are going to sound pretty extreme to a lot of people.
Oh, for sure.
We're talking about blistering critiques of U.S. imperialism, claims that the European Union is basically a puppet state,
Yeah.
all the way down to dire warnings about technocratic, algorithmic censorship orchestrated by the deep state.
Which brings up a really important point. Just to be incredibly clear upfront to you listening, we are not here to endorse these theories.
Right. We aren't picking a side.
Exactly. We're not taking a stance on whether the U.S. is an empire in decline or whether tech billionaires are the new fascists or any of that left-wing or right-wing politically charged stuff.
No. Our mission today is purely to be your cartographers.
Just drawing the map.
Exactly. We are going to impartially map out the exact arguments these four thinkers laid out in the source material. We just want to show you the architecture of their worldviews.
So you can examine the blueprints and, decide for yourself what makes sense.
Exactly. So let's start with the foundation of how we actually view time and progress.
Yeah.
Because to understand the shifting global power dynamics, we have to look at the timeline we are supposedly on.
Right.
The panel kicks off by completely dismantling the mindset of 1989.
1989. So the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Yep.
Let's actually put ourselves back in that headspace for a second, because the psychological shift in the West was, euphoric.
Oh, totally.
The Cold War is over, the Soviet Union is collapsing, And you have the political scientist Francis Fukuyama writing his famously bold essay, The End of History.
Which is such a bold title.
It really is. And his thesis wasn't like that things would literally stop happening, but that the ideological evolution of humanity had reached its final destination.
Right, that liberal democracy and free market capitalism had just decisively won.
The rules-based order was the final perfected form of human government. Roll credits. We solved the puzzle.
It was intoxicating. The West just assumed this system would permanently statically govern the globe forever.
But then you wake up today.
Right. Contrasting that 1989 triumph with the chaotic reality of today is where Willem Middelkoop, the economist on the panel, introduces a violently different framework.
Okay.
He argues that Fukuyama's fatal flaw was looking at history as a straight line toward a utopian destination. Middelkoop says history isn't a line, it's a wave.
Like a frequency, like sound waves or light waves or ocean tides.
Exactly. And he brings in some serious macroeconomic data to anchor this. If you look at the last 500 years of global history, measuring the rise and fall of dominant world powers.
So we're talking from like the Portuguese to the Spanish, the Dutch, the British, and now the Americans.
Yes. Major systemic changes in global power happen, on average, every 92 years.
Wait, 92 years. That feels so eerily specific to claim as a historical average.
It does, right. But he acknowledges the range fluctuates, like between 70 to 100 years.
Okay, that makes more sense.
But 92 is the historical mean for these massive tectonic shifts in the global system. And when you do the math on that average, the current geopolitical panic suddenly looks a lot less like a shocking anomaly.
It looks more like a scheduled event.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, let's actually run the numbers on that. The current American empire, what historians call the Pax Americana, that was officially cemented at the end of World War II.
Right, when the U.S. held most of the world's gold.
Yeah, and they possessed the only nuclear weapons and effectively dictated the terms of global trade. That was 1945.
Which puts us roughly 81 or 82 years into the cycle today.
Oh, so we are hitting the edge of that 80 to 100-year window right now.
Right now.
The wars breaking out, the economic friction, the supply chain breakdowns, the institutional panic. According to Middelkoop's wave theory, this is entirely predictable.
It's right on time.
We are simply entering the transition phase of the cycle. We are leaving the American summer and entering the autumn.
And changing how you view time changes how you view the crisis.
How?
Well, if you view the decline of an empire as a natural, cyclical transition, literally like a season changing, then fighting it is an absurd waste of energy.
Oh, I see.
You can't pass a congressional resolution to delay winter. You can't build a military base to hold back the autumn. You just have to adapt your society to the reality that the climate is shifting.
That makes a lot of sense. But I think when people hear a phrase like the end of the American empire, they immediately picture like apocalyptic ruin.
Yeah, they picture Mad Max.
Right. Thunderdomes, eating out of tin cans, complete societal collapse. But Middelkoop used a historical analogy in the source material that I found incredibly clarifying.
The British one.
Yes. He pointed to the British Empire because people always ask him, panicked, is the U.S. dollar going to completely collapse?
Right.
And his response is to look at the British pound. The British Empire, the geopolitical behemoth that literally ruled the waves and controlled a quarter of the globe, is entirely gone. The empire is dead.
Right, it doesn't exist anymore.
But the British pound didn't vaporize. You can still fly to London today, get a coffee, and pay with pounds.
Exactly. A systemic transition doesn't equal the total annihilation of the society.
It just means you step down from the top podium of global dominance.
A demotion, not a destruction.
Exactly. Though I have to admit, I struggle a bit with the rigidity of this.
How so?
It feels almost like treating geopolitics as a natural law of physics, like gravity. I mean, don't empires just naturally overextend themselves financially, print too much money, and spread their militaries too thin after a century?
Right.
Couldn't this just be a self-fulfilling prophecy of bad management rather than some mystical 92-year clock ticking down?
And that is a great point. Adverbrugge, the philosopher on the panel, steps in with that exact nuance.
Okay, good.
He firmly cautions against treating these historical cycles as deterministic scientific laws. He agrees with Middelkoop that the cycles are very real and that history rhymes. Verbrugge even notes that the tense, bipolar geopolitical dynamics of 1989 are returning right now, almost like a recurring motif in a symphony.
Interesting.
But he warns against treating the 92-year mark like an expiration date stamped on a carton of milk.
Right, because if you look back further than 500 years, the Roman Empire or the great Chinese dynasties didn't just politely pack up and leave after exactly 90 years.
No, of course not. They operated on much longer, albeit still highly cyclical, timelines of expansion, stagnation, and collapse.
Okay, so the takeaway from the panel is that while the 92-year rhythm is a remarkably accurate lens for understanding the current American-led era, it's a pattern, not a prison.
Beautifully put. But it forces a very uncomfortable realization.
Which is?
If the American empire is indeed entering its winter phase, we have to look critically at the massive architecture it built during its summer.
Oh, right.
And the heaviest piece of infrastructure sitting on that shifting bedrock is NATO.
Oh, man. This is where the panel gets incredibly heated.
Oh, yeah.
We have to ask, is NATO a vital peacekeeper, a rusty relic of the Cold War, or just a proxy tool for the Pentagon to project power?
Three very different interpretations.
Exactly. Let's start with Court de Boeuf. Remember, he's coming from the inside. He has navigated high-level European politics. He looks at this through the lens of historical treaties.
Right. So historically, after a massive, world-altering conflict, the victorious powers sit down, take stock of the new reality, and draft a brand new treaty to organize the new world.
Makes sense.
After World War I, you had the Treaty of Versailles. After World War II, the creation of the United Nations.
But when the Cold War ended in 1989, that didn't happen.
No, it didn't.
The West didn't convene to create a new foundational framework for a post-Soviet world. They just looked at NATO, which was a massive military alliance explicitly engineered from the ground up to fight Moscow.
Literally its only purpose.
Right. And they decided to just keep driving it. And de Boeuf argues this was a catastrophic historical mistake.
And why is that?
Because by keeping the blunt instrument of the Cold War alive, instead of building a new architecture for peace, he believes NATO has slowly become toxic to the very stability it was supposed to protect.
And he emphasizes that this systemic toxicity becomes impossible to ignore when the alliance is helmed by unpredictable leaders.
Right.
He points directly to Donald Trump's first term. De Boeuf cites specific instances where Trump rapidly escalated conflicts, like authorizing sudden military action in Iran without bothering to consult or even warn his European NATO allies.
Wow.
Yeah. For a political insider like de Boeuf, this is proof that the system is broken. Europe is being dragged into volatile global conflicts by a leader they cannot control, which damages Europe's own geopolitical image and security.
That's a strong claim.
He even openly questions whether Europe wouldn't be better off scrapping NATO entirely and building something new.
And while de Boeuf thinks NATO is a flawed peacekeeper that just lost its way, de Vac, the historian, absolutely torches the premise altogether.
Yeah, his critique is blisteringly aggressive.
It really is. De Waag claims that NATO was never about peace. He argues that whenever Western politicians use the phrase rules-based order, it is pure geopolitical gaslighting.
Gaslighting.
Yeah. According to him, it translates to rules for thee, but not for me.
And the WAG pulls out the historical receipts to justify this rejection of the standard Western narrative.
Let's hear them.
We always told NATO is a purely defensive alliance. But de Waag points to NATO's military interventions in Yugoslavia, the decades-long war in Afghanistan, and the campaign in Libya.
Oh, right.
He argues that these were aggressive, offensive attacks often launched on the basis of fabricated evidence, or, in his words, lies, proving that NATO functions essentially as a vehicle for the Pentagon to create global strife and maintain American hegemony by force.
Right. And following that logic, both de Waag and Middelkoop arrive at a very grim assessment of the present moment.
Extremely grim.
They look at the horrific war in Ukraine, and they don't just see a localized territorial dispute between two neighbors.
No, they view it fundamentally as a massive proxy war between the U.S.-led NATO alliance and Russia.
Right. And even more terrifying, they see Ukraine as merely a warm-up act, a bloody dress rehearsal for a much larger, looming, inevitable conflict with China.
It is an incredibly bleak picture. But Verbrugge steps in here to synthesize these two extremes by examining NATO's historical dual role.
Okay, what does he say?
He argues that reality is far more complex than a binary choice between noble peacekeeper and evil imperial weapon.
Right, it's never black and white.
Exactly. He fully acknowledges that NATO was an instrument for American dominance. But, he argues, it also served an absolutely vital, indispensable role in pacifying a completely shattered Europe after 1945.
Oh, this brings us back to that visceral image of the wolf time in Germany in 1946 and 1947.
Yes, the total evaporation of order. The trauma in Europe was so profound, the mutual hatred between nations so fresh, that leaving them to rebuild their own militaries independently would have likely resulted in another war within a decade.
Because everyone was still so terrified of each other.
Exactly. Verbrugge argues that flooding Europe with American troops and placing the entire continent under the overarching NATO command structure was the only way to manage that chaos.
But this leads to a fascinating paradox.
What's that?
If NATO was explicitly built as a fortress to oppose Russia, why on earth did Russia seem somewhat comfortable with the arrangement for decades?
Because of Germany.
Germany?
You have to look at Russia's ultimate historical trauma. It isn't the United States. It's a militarized, aggressive Germany marching eastward.
Right, twice in the 20th century.
Twice in the 20th century, German armies inflicted unimaginable devastation on Russia. Bobrow points out that by having the United States effectively take over the sovereign defense of Western Europe, it meant that Germany was structurally demilitarized.
Oh, wow. So from Moscow's perspective, during the Cold War, looking at a pacified, militarily weak West Germany sitting quietly under an American nuclear umbrella, that was actually preferable to a heavily armed, fully independent German state with its own defense industry and, its own nuclear ambitions.
Absolutely. And to illustrate just how deeply this pacification rewired German culture, Verbrugge brings up a staggering modern statistic.
Oh, this blew my mind.
Recently, the German military realized they desperately needed troops and tried to initiate a recruitment drive. They mailed out letters to 200,000 young Germans, pitching them on the virtues of military service.
200,000 letters.
Out of 200,000 letters sent, how many responses do you think they got?
It's so crazy. Like, you'd think maybe a few thousand?
They received exactly 500 responses.
500 out of 200,000. That is a 0.25% response rate.
It completely proves this point.
It really does. The cultural muscle memory for militarization in Germany was completely atrophied by decades of relying on the NATO arrangement.
Yep.
But as Verbrugge notes, the tragedy is that this very dynamic is now shifting rapidly. The pressure is on for Europe to rearm.
Which naturally pivots our map from the military side of the coin to the political and economic side.
Right, like European Union.
If NATO was the hard power shield holding the line against Russia, Washington still needed a soft-powered economic engine to ensure Europe didn't drift away financially.
We have to ask if the EU is serving the same master.
So let's look at the textbook origin story of the EU. It's practically a fairy tale of bureaucratic genius.
It sounds so nice on paper.
It started in the 1950s as the European Coal and Steel Community, and the logic is beautifully elegant. Coal and steel are the two raw materials you absolutely must have to wage a modern industrial war.
Right.
If you legally and economically fuse the coal and steel industries of France and Germany together, neither nation can secretly build a tank army to attack the other without the other noticing immediately.
It's an economic lock.
Exactly. Designed to ensure continental peace.
That is the story taught in every political science class. But de Wacht, our historian, throws that entire textbook out the window.
Yeah, he does not buy it. He presents a deeply cynical, alternative narrative, claiming that the EU was never a democratic peace project from its inception. He takes direct aim at the founding fathers of the European project, men like Robert Schuman and Jean Monnet.
Right, and de Wacht doesn't just call them visionaries who happen to align with America.
No.
He asserts they were effectively operatives acting on behalf of Washington. He even drops the detail that former French President Charles de Gaulle allegedly considered Monnet to be a literal American spy.
It's wild. De Wacht argues that the fundamental blueprints for European integration didn't spring from a grassroots desire for European brotherhood.
Where did they come from then?
They were essentially handed down by the U.S. State Department. The true purpose, in this cynical view, was to create a consolidated, top-down bureaucratic structure that would make it infinitely easier for American corporate and political interests to maintain a grip on the European continent.
Because it's easier to control one centralized market than a dozen fractured ones. So what's the strategic endgame of America expending so much energy to control Europe? According to this geopolitical theory, it is to prevent the ultimate American nightmare,
Which is
a true, lasting alliance between Europe and Russia.
This is foundational geopolitical strategy. The United States is a maritime power. Its strength relies on controlling the oceans.
Right.
The nightmare scenario for a maritime power is the unification of the Eurasian landmass. Specifically, the combination of German industrial and technological brilliance with Russia's vast, practically infinite raw materials and energy resources.
Oh, I see.
If European factories are permanently fueled by cheap Russian gas and minerals, They create a self-sustaining economic powerhouse that doesn't need American markets, American protection, or American ships.
It would make U.S. influence in Eurasia completely obsolete.
Exactly.
And Dweck leans into this theory so hard that he applies it to very recent events. He asserts that this underlying terror of a European-Russian alliance is the exact reason why the United States blew up the Nord Stream pipeline.
Yeah, that is a huge claim.
Right, to physically, violently sever the cheap energy tie between Russia and the German industrial engine.
And we must strongly reiterate for the listener,
Yes.
this is Dweck's assertion being presented on the panel.
Yes.
It's a highly controversial and legally unproven claim regarding the pipeline sabotage. Just mapping the arguments here.
Absolutely.
But within the framework of his argument, it perfectly illustrates his thesis. Yeah. The U.S. will utilize extreme measures to ensure Europe and Russia remain decoupled.
I want to pause and synthesize this, though, because if the EU was essentially established as a subsidiary of, America, Inc., why is Europe currently behaving like it wants to be its own sovereign empire?
Good question.
We are seeing Brussels push for massive internal military budgets, its own defense commissioners, and aggressive foreign policy. That doesn't really look like a compliant subsidiary.
The metamorphosis is exactly what Verbrugge analyzes. He observes the EU is aggressively utilizing the war in Ukraine to fundamentally change its DNA.
Oh, interesting.
It is rapidly abandoning the identity of an economic peace project and is actively federalizing into a hard power, militarized bloc. The new unspoken motto in Brussels is no longer peace through trade, but peace through strength.
And Verbrugge argues they are using the specter of Russia to accelerate this transformation. He suggests the EU bureaucracy is actively cultivating Russia as a perpetual existential enemy because, well, fear is the ultimate political unifier.
It really is.
If you have a terrifying monster at the border, you can demand absolute internal unity from your member states. It gives Brussels the moral and political justification it needs to crush any rising populist or nationalist movements that might want to prioritize domestic issues or, break away from the EU's centralized control.
External threat creates internal cohesion. It's the oldest trick in statecraft. And the panel points to a very specific, almost darkly ironic example to illustrate this new militarized EU agenda.
The appointment of Kaja Kallas as the EU's new foreign policy chief.
Yes, she's the former Prime Minister of Estonia.
Which is a Baltic state right on Russia's border.
Exactly. And the panel was shockingly blunt in their assessment of her reputation.
Oh, yeah.
They noted that she is viewed by many insiders in Brussels as somewhat incompetent. One panelist literally called her a lottery winner who stumbled into a position of immense power.
They even claim the bureaucracy manages her so tightly that she isn't allowed to post on her own social media accounts without prior approval from higher-ups in the Commission.
But yet, despite those alleged professional shortcomings, she possesses one defining trait.
Which is?
An intense, fiery, uncompromising anti-Russia stance.
Oh.
And for this new militarizing European Union that desperately needs a unified aggressive front against a common enemy that makes her the absolutely perfect figurehead, she is the chosen avatar for this new hardline posture.
That makes a lot of sense, but if you zoom out even further, you see that Europe is just one piece on a much larger board.
Right.
If the U.S. is managing Europe to keep it isolated from Russia, what is the ultimate geopolitical goal? Where is all this tension actually pointing?
According to the panel, Europe and Russia are essentially the undercard. The main event is China.
To understand the U.S.-China dynamic, we have to look back to a piece of paper written in the 1990s, the Wolfowitz Doctrine.
Named after Paul Wolfowitz, a prominent U.S. Undersecretary of Defense.
Right. The doctrine was drafted in the euphoric aftermath of the Cold War, and it basically states, in plain language, that the absolute #1 objective of the United States moving forward must be to prevent the emergence of any new rival superpower on the global stage.
It was a blueprint for permanent unipolar dominance. And right now, the only entity with the economic mass and technological capacity to actually rival the U.S. is China.
Exactly.
Middlecoop, the economist, stresses that the West is dangerously underestimating the alliance forming against them. He points specifically to the BRICS nations.
Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa.
And their expanding roster of new members.
Right. He explicitly pushed back on a dismissive comment once made by former Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, who casually referred to BRICS as just a talking club.
Middlecoop argues that is a fatal miscalculation. BRICS is not a glorified debate society where leaders just complain about American dominance. They are actively, methodically engineering an entirely alternative global financial system.
Let's actually break down how that works, because this is the invisible plumbing of global power.
It's so important.
Right now, if a company in Brazil wants to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, they usually have to convert their currency into US dollars to make the trade.
Yep.
And that transaction flows through a messaging system called SWIFT, which the US effectively monitors and controls. Because the dollar is the global reserve currency, America can weaponize it.
Right.
They can sanction a country, freeze their dollar reserves, and lock them out of global trade overnight. It is an immense, unmatched superpower.
And that is exactly the superpower BRICS is trying to neutralize.
Oh, so.
They are establishing bilateral trade agreements using their own local currencies.
Hmm.
They are aggressively accumulating gold reserves to back their own financial instruments. They are building their own alternatives to SWIFT. If they succeed in creating a closed-loop economic system that entirely bypasses the US dollar, they strike at the very heart, the very foundation of American global hegemony.
Because the stakes are existential, the panel argues that the U.S. is essentially strong-arming Europe to participate in its economic war against China.
Yeah.
Europe is being drafted into a fight that might be actively destroying its own economy. We see this incredibly clearly with the example of ASML.
The Dutch technology giant.
Yes, this is perhaps the most crucial geopolitical choke point in the modern world. ASML manufactures incredibly complex machines called extreme ultraviolet, or EUV, lithography systems.
Often referred to as wafer steppers.
To put it simply, these machines use mirrors and lasers to print microscopic circuits onto silicon wafers.
It's basically magic.
It really is. They are the only machines on Earth capable of manufacturing the absolute most advanced microchips. If you want to build cutting-edge artificial intelligence or next-generation military targeting systems, you need chips made by an ASML machine.
They hold a virtual global monopoly.
And the panel highlighted how Washington exerted immense, unrelenting diplomatic pressure, essentially forcing the sovereign Dutch government's hand to revoke export licenses so that ASML could no longer sell these top-tier machines to Chinese companies.
It was a direct, heavy-handed intervention by the U.S. into European trade policy, explicitly designed to bottleneck China's entire technological and military advancement.
Right.
But why is the U.S. so obsessively focused on China? Court de Boeuf grounds this grand strategy in the gritty reality of domestic American politics and economics.
It's about industry.
Over the last 40 years, the United States watched its massive middle-class sustaining manufacturing base hollow out. The factories were packed up and shipped to China for cheaper labor.
Right.
If you want to understand the extreme political friction and populism in America today, de Boeuf argues, you just have to look at the economic devastation of places like the American Midwest.
A Rust Belt, entire towns where the steel mill or the auto plant closed, leaving behind generational poverty and opioid crises.
Exactly. De Boeuf notes that this specific economic devastation is the engine that fuels Donald Trump's voter base.
Okay, I see.
Therefore, the grand American strategy, regardless of whether a Democrat or a Republican is sitting in the Oval Office, remains fundamentally identical.
Which is?
Block China's rise at all costs, forcefully repatriate industry and supply chains back to North America, and demand that European allies sever their own economic ties with Beijing.
And Washington doesn't just ask nicely. The implied threat is severe. If a massive European company invests too heavily in Chinese manufacturing, the U.S. essentially says, fine, you can do business in Beijing, but you will lose access to the American market.
Which puts Europe in an impossible bind. It raises a massive question for the listener whose wallet is directly impacted by this.
Yeah.
If you're wondering why everything from your car to your smartphone is suddenly caught in supply chain limbo, or why local European manufacturing plants are struggling with inflation and energy costs, this is the chess game playing out over your head.
But isn't it incredibly dangerous for Europe to just obediently sever ties with its biggest trading partner? Like, what is the benefit for the everyday European citizen?
According to the panel, there is basically zero benefit for the everyday European.
Zero.
Their grim conclusion is that Europe is rapidly becoming collateral damage in this titanic clash between Washington and Beijing. Europe's industrial capacity and economic stability are being knowingly sacrificed on the altar of American grand strategy.
Okay, you just used the phrase grand strategy.
I did.
Let's interrogate that concept, because we've just spent 40 minutes outlining this massive, interconnected, multi-decade geopolitical chess game. But here is the terrifying million-dollar question.
Howie.
Are the people actually in charge masterminds executing a brilliant plan, or are they just panicking and making it up as they go along?
The panel offers two highly conflicting views on the competency of our leadership. First, you have the belief in the grand design, heavily influenced by thinkers like Zbigniew Brzezinski, a highly influential former U.S. national security advisor.
He wrote a seminal geopolitical book called The Grand Chessboard.
Yes, and the core thesis of that book is starkly geographic. Brzezinski argued that global dominance is a matter of map control. Whoever controls the massive Eurasian landmass stretching all the way from the ports of Rotterdam in Europe to the docks of Vladivostok in Russia effectively controls the world's resources and population.
Okay.
And in his view, the geographic pivot point, the absolute key to controlling Eurasia, is Ukraine.
So if you subscribe to that perspective, everything happening in Ukraine today isn't an accident. It is the bloody execution of a multi-decade American grand strategy to secure ultimate global dominance.
Right. It looks like ruthless, calculated 4D chess.
But then Court de Boeuf shatters that illusion. Remember, he isn't a theorist. He was an advisor at the absolute highest levels of government.
Right.
He essentially looks at the grand strategy theory and says, I was in the room, and let me tell you, there's almost no grand strategy in practice.
Right. He argues that politicians are almost entirely reactive. They don't have the bandwidth for multi-decade master plans because they are constantly consumed by immediate crises, media cycles, and polls.
Yeah.
He summarized the reality of political leadership in 3 words: events, events, events.
To illustrate this dangerous lack of strategy, the panel discussed the absolute absurdity of the current European militarization effort. Right now, Europe is panic spending hundreds of billions of euros, a massive defense budget surge they refer to as Trump's trillion.
Referencing the pressure Trump put on NATO allies to finally pay their share.
Yeah, exactly. But they aren't spending this money on a cohesive, forward-looking European defense strategy. They're largely just pouring it straight into the American defense economy to buy legacy weapons systems, like Patriot missiles.
This perfectly highlights the old military cliche that generals always prepare to fight the last war.
Precisely. If you look at the actual conflicts defining the modern battlefield, like in Ukraine, or the asymmetrical warfare in the Middle East, these wars are increasingly dominated by swarms of cheap, expendable, autonomous drones.
Yeah.
Yet Europe is spending fortunes on massively complex Patriot missile batteries. A Patriot system is incredible technology if you need to shoot down a multi-million-dollar fighter jet or a hypersonic ballistic missile.
Right.
But it is horribly inefficient and economically disastrous to fire a $2 million Patriot interceptor to shoot down a $2,000 drone you bought on Alibaba.
The math of that war is unwinnable.
It really is.
Furthermore, they pointed out how utterly illogical it is for tiny neighboring countries within the EU, like Belgium and the Netherlands, to independently procure their own localized, overlapping defense systems instead of deeply integrating their militaries.
Right.
It's chaotic, wasteful, and driven by national ego rather than strategy.
It sounds much more like a panicked game of whack-a-mole than a grand game of chess.
To cement just how chaotic it is at the top, de Boeuf shared a personal anecdote from a dinner in Washington, D.C. back in 2004 that just blew my mind.
Oh, the guest list for this dinner is incredible.
Tell me.
You have George W. Bush, Zbigniew Brzezinski himself, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, and Guy Verhofstadt, the Belgian Prime Minister whom de Boeuf was advising at the time.
These are the literal architects of the modern global order.
Right. This is right after the invasion of Iraq, a moment of immense global instability. De Boeuf and his boss went into this dinner desperately trying to figure out what the unified European message should be to President Bush regarding the chaos in the Middle East.
And what did de Boeuf witness when he sat down with the masterminds?
A total paralyzing cacophony. He said no one at the table, not the American strategists, not the European leaders, had any idea what the actual strategy was moving forward.
Oh, wow.
It was just a mess of conflicting ideas, guesswork, and confusion. As he starkly put it, despite our comforting illusion of a grand design, nobody is in the cockpit.
Nobody is in the cockpit. Honestly, that is a terrifying thought when you consider the sheer scale and destructive power of the geopolitical machinery.
Truly.
But nature abhors a vacuum. If our elected political leaders are floundering, purely reactive and just managing events, who is actually stepping up to fill the power void?
Right.
This is where the panel takes a very dark turn inward, leading us away from maps and treaties and toward the invisible threat within.
We spent most of this deep dive looking at external borders and foreign empires, but Ad Verbrugge, the philosopher, flips the entire script.
What does he say?
He states flatly that he isn't afraid of Vladimir Putin. He isn't losing sleep over a Russian tank invasion. What truly terrifies him is the social, cultural, and institutional collapse he sees brewing inside the West, projecting it could reach a breaking point within the next 10 years.
He believes the foundation is rotting from within, and the primary culprit, in his view, is the insidious rise of what he calls a technocracy.
A technocracy.
Because our traditional democratic institutions, congresses, parliaments seem so paralyzed, polarized, and incapable of solving complex modern problems, there is this growing, deeply seductive push to just hand the steering wheel over to the experts,
Yes, you.
to let tech engineers, data scientists, and artificial intelligence algorithms manage society for us.
Verbrugge doesn't mince words. He calls this movement borderline fascist.
Yeah.
It's driven by this elitist idea that modern society is simply too complex and messy for everyday people to vote on, so we should let the machines and the technocrats mathematically optimize our lives for us.
And the panel points to specific companies to show that this isn't science fiction, it is happening right now.
Right.
They highlight Palantir, the massive data analytics company founded by the billionaire Peter Thiel.
Right.
Palantir's software is used by militaries, police departments, and intelligence agencies worldwide to process massive amounts of surveillance data.
But the crucial historical detail they highlight is how Palantir was funded. In its early formative days, it received critical investment capital from an entity called In-Q-Tel.
Which is literally the venture capital arm of the CIA.
Exactly. The panel's argument is that true, hard power is rapidly migrating out of traditional, observable political centers like the White House or European parliaments.
Right.
It is flowing into the hands of private tech overlords. These massive tech entities, often intertwined with the deep state from their inception, operate almost entirely outside of democratic oversight.
Yeah.
Yet they possess immense, unprecedented power to shape society, monitor citizens, and influence behavior.
And how do they shape society on a day-to-day basis? Through the intentional death of dialogue. The panel argues that big tech platforms intentionally organize, incentivize, and monetize extreme political polarization.
It is the core of their business model. Social media algorithms aren't designed to inform you. They are explicitly engineered to maximize your engagement, to keep your eyes glued to the screen for as long as possible to serve you ads. And the most psychologically effective way to do that is to show you content that you already vehemently agree with, while simultaneously enraging you with grotesque, exaggerated caricatures of opposing viewpoints.
It effectively wipes out the middle ground. It scrubs nuance, empathy, and reasonable opposing viewpoints entirely from your digital reality.
You are constantly told that your side is perfectly righteous and the other side represents the literal end of the world.
And this ties into a highly controversial point the panel raised regarding speech control. They argued that the most significant and effective recent wave of censorship didn't originate from loud, table-pounding populist leaders holding rallies.
Right.
They claim it was a quiet, coordinated effort, pointing specifically to actions under the Biden administration, where they allege tech giants and Washington bureaucrats colluded behind the scenes to suppress certain narratives, flag dissent as misinformation, and control the flow of information on global platforms.
Again, we are strictly mapping the arguments of the panel here, but the philosophical point Verbrugge makes about this digital ecosystem is profound.
It is.
He points out that AI and algorithms have no soul. They have no concept of community, no shared human history, no capacity for grace, and no moral center.
Right.
If a society allows itself to be held together only by algorithmic control, behavioral nudges, and digital manipulation, it will ultimately tear itself apart because the connective human element of trust has been entirely removed.
To hammer home just how dangerous this internal societal rot is, the panel brings up a chilling historical parallel. Weimar Germany.
The brief, chaotic, democratic period in Germany right before the complete collapse into totalitarianism.
Right. In Weimar Germany, the political and economic systems began to hyperinflate and entirely cease functioning. And the warning the panel draws from this is psychological.
How so?
When a political system becomes that profoundly dysfunctional and toxic, good, capable, morally grounded people refuse to participate in it, why would they run for office? The job is just managing misery, facing endless public vitriol, and taking the blame for a broken system.
So who does that leave in charge? If the good people tap out of the democratic process, you are left only with narcissists, opportunists, grifters, and individuals lacking basic psychological stability running for office.
Exactly.
The political arena turns into a circus. Meanwhile, the corporate elites and the tech overlords just quietly loot the system from the background before it finally crashes.
Okay, I have to stop here because this is incredibly suffocatingly bleak.
It is very bleak.
If I'm listening to this on my commute, am I supposed to just give up?
Yeah.
Is the ultimate conclusion of this panel that democracy is doomed to be replaced by CIA-backed server farms, algorithmic fascism, and proxy wars?
No, thankfully that is not where they leave it. Despite the incredibly heavy, cynical analysis of the systems, the panel's ultimate takeaway is actually a very grounded human plea.
Okay.
It's a call for what they term in Dutch as verheffing, which roughly translates to intellectual elevation or edification, and a desperate demand for the return of genuine face-to-face dialogue.
They point out that at every level of society, we have simply stopped talking to people we disagree with.
Right.
At the geopolitical level, they noted with alarm that under the current administration, there has been virtually zero official, high-level diplomatic contact with the Kremlin. We have just stopped talking to our nuclear-armed rivals, opting for isolation over diplomacy.
And we've mirrored that behavior in our personal lives. We've allowed the algorithms to divide us into hostile digital tribes.
Yeah, we really have.
The panel's conclusion is that the only way out of this cyclical 92-year trap, the only way to resist the creeping technocracy, is to actively, stubbornly restore human-to-human communication.
We have to seek out elevation.
Educate ourselves beyond the headlines, log off the platforms designed to enrage us, and refuse to let our worldviews be reduced to data points in a machine's engagement strategy.
Let's bring this all together because we have covered an immense expanse of ground today.
We really have.
We started by challenging our perception of time, looking at history not as a permanent victory lap, but as a 92-year wave, predicting the current turbulence of the American empire as a natural seasonal shift.
Right. We critically examined the highly debated roles of our most massive institutions. We looked at NATO and the EU, questioning whether they are genuine forces for stability or aggressive instruments of Western power, deliberately isolating Russia and stoking the fires for a geopolitical proxy war.
We looked past Europe to the ultimate prize on the grand chessboard, China.
Yeah.
We explored how the global financial system is being challenged by BRICS and how Europe is being squeezed as collateral damage in an economic war for industrial supremacy, specifically fighting over the choke point of advanced microchips.
We questioned the competency of the architects, wondering whether the leaders in the cockpit are playing brilliant 4D chess or just desperately reacting to events while wasting billions on the wrong weapons for the wrong wars.
And finally, we confronted the invisible internal threat.
The rise of a soulless technocracy that uses algorithms to divide us, censor dissent, and conquer our institutions from the inside out.
So why does all this matter to you, the listener, as you go about your day?
Right.
Because understanding these dynamics completely changes how you process the world around you. Recognizing the mechanics of the rules-based order isn't just an academic exercise in memorizing maps or treaties.
No, it's about recognizing the invisible forces, whether they are massive political alliances, deep state tech investments, or the social media algorithm vibrating in your pocket right now.
That are actively trying to dictate how you think, what you fear, and who you are instructed to view as an enemy.
Which brings us back to the very beginning. We talked about walking into a house and feeling the floorboards tilt because the bedrock beneath is shifting.
Yeah.
We know from history that physical empires, the Romans, the British, and perhaps now the Americans, might operate on these 90 or so year lifespans before they inevitably have to step down and transform.
But that historical rhythm leaves you with a truly haunting question about the future we are building right now.
Exactly. If geographical empires based on land and armies have a natural expiration date, what is the lifespan of our new invisible digital empires?
When will the algorithm-based order face its own cyclical collapse?
And when that digital bedrock finally cracks, who or what will be waiting in the rubble to replace it?
Thank you for joining us as we mapped out these complex arguments. We hope it gave you the tools to look a little closer at the fault lines in your own world.
Thanks for coming on this deep dive into the source material. We'll see you next time.